With the nearly never-ending growth of the roguelite deck builder genre, it continues to get harder and harder to stand out. Moon Sigil Atlas, however, has done just that with its sigil casting system, and in my opinion, even stands up to the flagships of the genre like Monster Train and Slay the Spire. Though, much like those flagships, it does continue both the pros and the cons of the genre that are sort of inherent to the progression formulas they all use, even going so far as keeping fairly standard block, buff, and attack mechanics that you'll be fairly familiar with from these other games. But basically, just like the flagships, it keeps the ability to set up wild card combos, it lets you find and use run-altering artifacts, and it lets you fight off bosses with unique movesets focused on shifting around the mechanics of the game itself. And of course, it has the downsides such as RNG being able to lock you out of strategies, fairly generic starting cards galore, and enemy pools that you'll likely have memorized by the time you beat the game a second or third time. The reason I say it stands up in the genre though is that while it does not counteract any of these common tropes, it does introduce a new and interesting mechanic that lets you engage with the genre in a fun way. Namely, the sigil casting system mentioned earlier, which also has the interesting side effect of introducing positioning to the formula as well. Now, the simple explanation is that your spells are shapes, and you apply them to your moon-shaped playing field. So instead of being mana-limited, you're instead space-limited, with each of the three factions actually interacting with this mechanic in a different way. Combine this with the fact that each of the four major bosses also toys with the shape, size, and quantity of moons you play with, while a few elites tend to play with the shapes and placements of your spells themselves, and you can get some very interesting battles under your belt. Outside of these though, most of the normal enemies and even a few of the elite enemies will leave the actual shape of your moon alone and instead opt for putting obstacles on your playing field, or introducing different cursed tiles and such to make you have to consider where and what you want to play a little more than just spamming the skill. Diving a bit deeper into the actual battles though, most of the core rules will still be fairly familiar. There's standard damage buffs, blocking buffs, vulnerabilities, bleed, burn, etc. type mechanics, with only a few less common status effects like Wounded, which is a combo damage debuff and delayed damage skill, and there's of course things like Ash, which change your playing field, but it's still fairly straightforward to use with clear descriptions. The big things that will probably be a bit new are your card modifiers and positioning. To block an attack, you need enough defense to absorb it with that enemy's active zone, which is done primarily through putting defense runes in those spaces in your cards. This means that you need to choose which direction you want to block on any given turn, and even choose which cards you'll want runes placed in. Thankfully, unlike other games in the genre, defense is not a depleting resource, so you just need to block the biggest damage attack, and you'll avoid anything smaller for that turn. So this isn't as difficult to maintain as it may sound at first, you just have to pay attention to which way you're putting it. There are similar attack runes that function the same way, albeit for damage, but since there are far more cards that just do damage naturally without them, you'll likely find yourself steering more towards defensive options, especially when most combos work better with natural damage than with rune damage. The primary strategy I've found, at least from playing by myself as well as watching several friends play the title, is basically to try hard to purge your starter cards as quickly as possible, namely wards and bolts. This is because wards actually have no effect outside of naturally having one of the defensive runes, and bolts are generally small bursts of targeted damage for a fairly large chunk of space on your board. And since you can get runes placed into your other cards, these wards and such become a lot less important. Now obviously these do vary a little between factions since each faction has unique shapes for both of these cards, as well as having special bolt modifiers and even deck builds, with blue being basic triangle bolts that behave and play cleanly, green having slightly larger bolts that clear themselves out of the way if you fill your board completely, and red having the smallest bolts but having them enchanted with burn, which leaves Ash behind for an extra turn whenever you place them out. And of course, these differences also fit in with the themes of each faction, thankfully, with blue focusing on straightforward draw mechanics, temporary board effects, etc., and as such probably being the easiest faction to master. All this while green focuses on continually filling and clearing the board with larger cards, as well as playing around with exhaust mechanics, removing cards from your deck, and in turn gaining abilities that exploit those exhausted cards. Probably the most difficult of the three is the red faction, playing a lot with status effects, burning cards, as well as developing strategies around using the Ash resource that, at first, will impede your deck greatly, but can later be turned into a tool to allow you to ramp up to exceptional levels, especially since some cards rely on being placed entirely on Ash. And generally, I would say that blue and green feel the most balanced and able to consistently build at least okay decks in their style, while red I often struggled with to get into a good rhythm since I kind of didn't do too well with it unless I got a very lucky start. Obviously, on the base difficulty, this is not going to be that punishing. You can still beat it with a bad deck, since you've got a lot more room to make mistakes. But as you start to engage with Moon Sigil's post-game in what are called Eclipse modes, some of the challenges can very much result in needing way better RNG to even stand a chance at progression, much less victory. And while the starting decks you unlock can help a bit, not to mention the Slay the Spire style run start bonuses, outside of a select few outliers, you're probably not going to see these making a huge impact on your overall runs on higher difficulties. So you might find yourself re-rolling some of these bonuses to get those rare, exceptionally strong ones. Now, on the plus side, at least when it comes to being able to build towards consistency, the game does have a static set of bosses, and the enemies of each region are also consistent in the pools they pull from, even if it's not always in the same order. And your first few successful runs will see you encountering the 3 primary bosses, each also feeling like they actually fit the same themes as the mages, your first boss being similar to the blue faction with just straightforward damage, some moon curses, and forcing you to fight a couple moons. They stop buffing the boss itself, and when you beat them, the little moons that is, they do provide you with tools to aid in fighting said boss. The second boss, oddly enough, mirrors the red faction even though that's the third one you unlock, with the ability to shatter the moon when you reach certain damage thresholds, making it more complicated to play various cards, but also giving you the ability to rotate the moon during the fight to shift this up a little bit and aim your blocks a little bit easier. And the final normal run boss, which is contentious among some players, but generally is not as rough as most people seem to be thinking. I would pair it more with the green faction, since it enlarges the moon, but focuses its mechanics around spell control and destroying blocking tiles that encroach on you the more you cast, which it thankfully does provide tools to counter. Out of the 3, I would say this one is probably the most fun to me, oddly enough, despite people's complaints, while I do find the second boss to be a much more unique feeling of the bunch. Now, you may have noticed earlier, I did mention 4 bosses, and from here on out, there will be some spoilers because yes, there's a semi-secret 4th boss in the game that lets you use your own card shapes as the moon themselves. He doesn't introduce many new mechanics, outside of a damage limiter that keeps you from one-shotting him, but it does provide an interesting challenge managing multiple distinct moons, and even choosing which of your cards you want to sacrifice for playing space. Now I say semi-secret because he's not terribly hard to find, and chances are once you've beaten the game once, you'll know what you need to do to unlock him and fight him, which, yes, you have to do it every single run if you want to fight him multiple times. Now, sticking with the spoilery stuff, while it does have a story, it's told through just a handful of intermission screens, with short lore snippets about each of the factions, the gods, and ultimately this final boss and the universe. There's not a lot of dialogue or a lot of depth to the story even, but it does give you an adequate framing and world building base to at least tie it together. And I would say overall, if you enjoy deck builders and don't mind how they handle RNG usually, I can 100% recommend dipping into Moon Sigil Atlas, especially if you liked playing with combo decks or puzzles. Though I might be slightly biased towards this playstyle personally, considering I used to play Dimir before it even had a name in Magic the Gathering.